Hi there guys, Adam here as per usual. Welcome back to the next part of the rig building project. Today's topic is on EQ. Now, this is a great tip I've picked up from using guitars in the studio and also from a guy at Huge Racks Inc. forum. Check out HRI forum on the net. There's a great thread there on building your first rack and stuff. Lots of handy information in there on this topic and other topics that are important. EQ. Two considerations for EQ. The first is what type of EQ are you going to use and how are you going to use it. Let's address issue 2 first. How are you going to use EQ? For me, it's an absolute no-brainer to have what's called pre and post EQ, so to use 2 EQ units. Why? So the EQ on your amp, although it is an EQ and you increase the bass, it definitely increases low end, increase the treble, it definitely increases the high end, decrease the mids, it definitely scoops out the mids, etc. 3-band EQ isn't enough for me, and a lot of people find that 3-band EQ is very limiting. Mesa Boogie cottoned onto this with some of their Mark series amps. The Mark 5, has the famous 5-band graphic EQ on there as well, just for kind of a bit of mastering polish, bit of extra tone shape and potential. What I find is that the bass, middle and treble E controls on an amp, or certainly not all amps but on a lot of amps, affect more the way that the actual amp interacts and sounds within itself rather than in the context of the whole rig. So if you turn up the bass on an amp, it kind of it distorts in a different way than if you had no bass and all treble. It kind of affects the sound and the tone of the amp and how the amp feels, especially as well under your fingers. So what I like to do is dive in the trilogy to get kind of how I want the amp sounding and not worry too much about where the knobs of the EQ are. I normally find that involves cutting a lot of bass and having a little bit extra middle and cutting a lot of treble, cutting a bit of treble as well on there. That's how I usually set up the trilogy on the dirty channels. And that's how I find the basic tone and the characteristic of the amp and distortions. That's what I kind of like, the characteristic of the gain. And then we want is what I'm calling pre and post EQ. So pre EQ is guitar running into preamp, and post EQ is in the effects loop. Ideally you would have this after the power amp as well, but that's getting very expensive to kind of do, and it comes with its own unique set of risks as well. You're using that. But my setup's going to have, and most kind of guys setups who are using this, has EQ in front of the amp and EQ in the effects loop as well. I've been experimenting, and the way I like to run it is I like to have pedal board, then into the preamp EQ, into the amp, and then straight back out into the EQ, and then into the rest of the effects in the rack and back into the amp there. What I do when I'm recording guitars is I pretty much take out all of the low end prior to recording. If you have a lot of low end running in the amp, it's just really flubby and really fat and rich, and it can kind of get fuzzy and flabby, and you don't really want that. If you want a tighter sound, take out some of that low end before running into the amp. You can do that with an EQ pedal, or in my case I'm using the rack mount EQs. So channel 1 of my rack mount EQ is preamp shaping, so I'm dropping a lot of the low end out, boosting the mids a little, and taking just a touch of the treble out. Taking the low end out, that's going to tighten the gain of the amp. It's going to make it a lot tighter, a lot less flubby. Adding some mid boost in, adding a bit of mid in there, is going to just bring out the kind of honkiness of the guitar. And the mid is really the frequencies, in my opinion and in my experience, that slap the front end of the amp, to really smack the tubes into a musical distortion. You can do the same with treble, but it kind of gets a bit brittle and harsh, and that's not what I'm after. Boost the mids just a bit, and it emphasises the fact that it's a guitar running in the amp. And that's it, cut a little bit of the top end out just so you have a very smooth signal going into the amp, through the amp, etc. And then out of the effects loop, that's when you can add in your bass again. So you definitely want some of the bass there, you don't want completely no bass at all. Add in that low end you took out, maybe not all of it, just a bit of it, and really kind of warm and fatten up that sound. You can either leave the mids or take them down a touch. Some people boost them further, that's too much for me. I kind of just more or less, me experiment so far, more or less left it neutral, maybe cut it a bit. And the treble, again, I'm just bringing a little bit of the treble back in there. Not mega boosting it back to its original position, I don't think, but just bringing it back in there a little bit. And this is the theory, someone told me on the HRI forum, I think his username is JK, this is the theory of the sort of metallic sad face, happy face kind of EQ curve. So running into the amp, you have a sad face, bass, no bass, lots of mid, no treble, and then in the effects loop you have a happy face, lots of bass, no mid, lots of treble, and you kind of get that nice sine sinuous wave effect. That's why I'm using 2 channels of EQ. With 1 channel of EQ, I would put it in the effects loop for definite, just to use it as a kind of mastering polish. Next, what unit do you want to go with? 2 styles, 2 distinct styles. The first is your graphic EQ. If you're new to EQ, this is probably the one for you because it's easier to kind of understand and easier to use. You have the faders there. 30 bands is going to be overkill. I would go with 15 bands on either side, 2 15 bands. The picture's not brilliant, but sad face, happy face, nice sinuous curve. It's cutting the low end coming in and then boosting it when it's going back out into the power amp. Graphic EQ is great, especially if you want to really emphasize certain frequencies or subtract certain frequencies. So if you have a favorite guitar, that's absolutely wonderful, but it's just not rich enough. You can really boost in some of the low end with that. What I've gone with, and what I'd recommend if you're sort of more experienced with using EQ in the studio, etc., is a parametric EQ. 2 channel parametric EQ. This is the TL Audio Ivory Series EQ 5013 valve equalizer. So it has 2 valve stages as well for a bit of that added valve warmth. But this is parametric, and the reason I've opted for parametric is because it's smoother and it's more suitable for guitar. So the quality, it's got adjustable quality as well, which quality means faithfulness to the frequency. So if you have it on maximum quality on 15k, it's only boosting or lowering 15k. On lowest quality, you're getting a big boost or a big dip of the surrounding frequencies as well, and it's just a lot smoother for me. With a graphic EQ, you can kind of fake the sound of a parametric EQ by using really smooth flowing lines. It doesn't exactly cop the parametric sound. I've experimented with both work well. The graphic EQ I did enjoy, and you can really sharpen some of those mid frequencies to bring out nice sustained singing notes higher up the neck. You can't really do that with a parametric because you're boosting all the frequencies around it. But experiment for yourself. I will provide some sound clips in a later video, but the parametric is the way to go for me. Right, just to finish off, we'll talk about each of those 2 units in more depth in a later video, and I'll also hopefully provide some sound samples comparing the 2. That's about it, guys, so hopefully this helps with the EQ section. The one thing I didn't mention is digital EQ, because I wasn't really interested in digital EQ. It would be very good if you wanted to have MIDI presets for the EQ. There is a couple of analog units that have recall. So TC unit from yesteryear, I can't remember, an older TC electronic unit is a parametric EQ, but you can save presets. I'm not sure how it works. That would have been really useful in this rig, but they're a tad pricey. Hopefully this helps. See you in the next part, where we'll be discussing more things to take into consideration when building your perfect rig.